Today we're going to look at three auxiliary verbs. You've probably heard me identify them as helper verbs. Helper is the generic or the frequently used word to describe these particular verbs, formerly known as auxiliary verbs, informally known as helper verbs. Three of them today. Do, be, and have. I'm sure that you have heard all three of these helper verbs, but I want to discuss them in a little more detail now and how they're used. Let's look at do first. Do is primarily used for as an infinitive and also to form questions and negative statements. Let's look at sentence number one. I do not agree with your opinion. I do not agree with your opinion. Do you see how this is negative? Why? The helper verb not has created this to be a negative scenario, but do is connected to it to create this negative scenario. Agree is the main verb. I do not agree is correct English. Sentence number two. Now, sentence number two is a little bit more peculiar, correct? When you hear the word infinitive, when it's attached to verbs, you are thinking to and a main verb, right? To learn, to drive, to eat, and that's correct. But there are times in English when we do not use to when connected to a verb. And do is one of those cases where we will not use to in this particular case. Pay attention because there are exceptions. But in this case, we will not use the infinitive to. We're going to use do only. Why do they do that? Why do they do that? Correct. Redundant? Yes, you'll see do twice in this sentence, but it is not, while it is redundant, it is not incorrect. What would be incorrect? Why to do they do that? Not correct. Or why do they to do that? Also not correct. In this particular case, with the helper verb do, we do not use the infinitive to. We merely use do by itself. Why do they do that? This is correct. Let's go to the second example. Be. Well, we know be is the to be verb, correct? I am, he is, she is, they are, we are, etc. But be is going to be used with the verb, the main verb, that's going to end with the ing as a continuous use. Here are two examples. He is studying Portuguese in Brazil. He is studying Portuguese in Brazil. What is the to be verb? Is. Is correct when attached to the pronoun he. He is. And then to the main verb study, we add ing for continuous. He is studying Portuguese in Brazil. What about this? She is studying Portuguese in Brazil. Correct. They are studying Portuguese in Brazil. Correct. We are studying Portuguese in Brazil. Correct. What about I? I am studying Portuguese in Brazil. The to be verbs are very consistent with the main verb. The main verb just merely stays the same, doesn't change. We just only add the ing for the continuous use. Sentence number two. Are you reading at home today? Now we're asking a question. Are you reading at home today? Are you, the to be verb, reading, the main verb in a continuous tense, adds the ing. Are you? is he, is she, are they, are we, am I. Nothing else changes with the main verb reading. Are you reading? Am I reading? Is he reading? Is she reading? Are they reading? Are we reading? See how consistent English can be with the main verb use, just merely adding ing. Have. The last helper verb today is have. We used with the past participle. That's a very fancy way of saying adding an ed to the main verb. We just call it past participle. Try not to be too concerned about memorizing what past participle is. It's good to know the terminology, past participle, but it's not necessary to focus only on that. It's better to know what that means, not what that is. So past participle only means we're adding ed to the main verb. And we're going to form the perfect tense of the verb. 2 examples. I have studied in Sao Paulo for 5 years. I have studied in Sao Paulo for 5 years. You see how we added the ed to the main verb. Now we'll talk about this particular case. Often with English, almost always when a verb ends in y and becomes past tense, we replace the y with an I and then add ed. So study in the present tense ends with a y. In the past tense, we replace that y with an I and add ed. I have studied correct English. He has studied. She has studied. They have studied. We have studied. I am studied? No, not correct. I have studied. Sentence number 2. I have learned much from my professor. I have learned much from my professor. We add ed to the main verb learn, which becomes learned. The e is not pronounced. Learned, this e that is not pronounced. We'll talk about this trickiness about the pronunciation of past tense verbs. When do we pronounce the e and when don't we pronounce the e in regular verbs in the past tense? In any event, I have learned, you have learned, he has learned, she has learned, we have learned, they have learned. Okay, so learned does not change in any event when connected to the helper verb have. All that changes is the pronoun that's connected to have. I have, he has, she has, it has. Sound confusing? No worries. We will continue with these more often, more often, more often, until you do this in your sleep when it becomes habit. Thank you very much for joining me today. Please click like. Also, I ask you to please comment. Feel free to comment. I'll be glad to respond to your comments. What is it about English that makes it so confusing? I understand. These things take time, correct? And time you shall have. Thanks for joining me. Take care.